if we're looking at the widget we're building at the high-level architecture, we have the widget, then we have our chart map, then we have the client list that we can scroll through, and then we have the client list detail. So we need to create the client list, and we need to create the client list detail. To do that, I'm going to take help from our template. So if you open up inside of the component, you'll see that we have our template, and we can use the Recoil template, and the Recoil template will put some scaffolding that's going to interact with Recoil. So in terminal, we can take the Recoil, generate React CLI with the template that's already set up for you, and then we're going to create a client list detail component, and we'll create a client list component. And this template already including testing suite that ties into Recoil. It includes the SaaS and the component. There we go. Okay, now we're ready to continue with our widget. For widget, where we stopped at the last lesson is we're retrieving the data, and we're using the use effect to kind of see the results. So what we can do, we don't need the use effect anymore, and what we can do is we can start from the JSX code, and when we return the tag, we can actually start building our component, our widget component. I'm going to collapse it so it's neatly organized, our return. And what we're going to do is, first of all, we need to check if the data was loaded. So to check if the data is loaded, we can use inline of JSX, the conditional statement, and check if the client data, if it's created, meaning it's not null, that's why I'm putting the question mark, and the length is greater than 0, then we know that it was loaded. And we need to do the same with the map data. So with the map data, if the map feature length is greater than 0, then we know that the data is loaded. And we need both of them because we need to put the coordinates on the map. What's happening when we start doing conditional inline in JSX, the browser really doesn't know, the IDE, I'm sorry, doesn't know what we're doing. So when we start typing characters, the IDE is trying to fix errors that don't really exist, and it can really mess up our code. So we really need to watch for that. That can really mess you up. So we need to be really organized with how we create our tags. So we need an opening and closing tags for the condition that the data loaded, and we need to close that tag and then ask, or if the data is not loaded, then we want to open and close tags that will just give us a message of loading, or you can put a loader, whatever you want to put. And there you go, it looks like it didn't break. And now inside of our, if it loaded, then we can put, we can create inside of our tags a grid container. So it's going to be a grid container, and we need to import it from Material UI. And in our grid container, we need a grid item, and we need to give it a size. So the left size is going to be the client size. So we're going to put it as 3 because we want it smaller. And on the right side, we're going to be using the map we created. So we can give it a grid item size of 8. Now we can import our component. We need the client list component, and we need the map, the world map. And again, you really need to watch this, because what happened is this IDE is really trying to fix your formatting, and it doesn't know conditional JS6. So many times it's just going to break your code, and you're going to be in it. And if the code is not set up nicely and easy to read, it's really become hard to work with. So we're going to set everything up. Our scale, I've just binded the map data and the client data. We need to put the scale. We use 200. The CX use 0. The CY, let's put 200. The initial rotation, I'll put 100. And the speed, I'll put 0.3. And make sure I close the tag. Okay, here we go. We called our client data. Let's refactor that. I want to call it clients data. Makes a little bit more sense. And they want us to fix the import order, and we don't need the use effect. Okay, if we want, this is a good point to kind of use the yarn format, and the yarn format won't work if there's any errors. And it's going to just align it to the format that we decide on. And it's tied up into the package JSON. We have all those run scripts, so they become useful as we go and write our code. If the data was loaded, we also need to create our client list detail. So if I put it under the grid, it's just going to show under. So we want the list, we want the map, and then under we want the client list component. Next, let's open up the world map, and we want to make some changes here. The first thing that we need to take care of is the types. So if you open up the type, we called coordinate data, but we change it from just coordinate to the client data, and we may want to take some more properties that we're loading and use it in our world map. So if you remember, we created a model and we called it clients object, and then we can take all those properties, copy them, and put it in the type. And that way we'll be able to access them, and the object is going to match. The reason again that I decided to create two objects, one in our world map and one in the model, is that I really want to decouple the component. So I want to be able to just take my world map and copy it and paste it in another project, versus trying to figure out, hey, what else do I need? So adding that extra step, and even though I'm adding a little bit extra duplicate code, it's worth it for me, because I'll be able to take my component and just drop it in another project. And the reusability is it's a small price to pay, just adding a type. But again, you can decide and do whatever you like, but that's how I architect it. It's everybody decide, and can decide what's the best practices that they think is right. Now that we have our new types, we can actually, if we look at the interface, let's just change it from coordinate. See, now the coordinate data is broken because we changed the name here. Now it's going to be called coordinate data, and we can refactor the name and change it from coordinate data. Let's change it to clients data. For the projection, I'm going to change it from go back into the projection, and we're using geo orthographic, and I'm going to change it to geo equal earth. I'm changing it. I don't want just a circle earth. I want it to be a little bit more flat, so it's going to flatten the earth, this projection. And then in our JS6, we can make some more changes as well. We don't need the button because we're going to have it rotated automatically. So we can change the initial value for the rotation to start rotating automatically. And we can take the projection we're not using, delete the button. We can clean up our imports. Now back at the JSX, the other thing we need to do is we can, let's take a look. Yeah, so if you can see here on the circle, let's collapse it so you can see it better. So when we're creating the circle, we don't need that circle anymore because we're not going to be, it's not going to be around map, so we can get rid of that as well with the group. Our SVG, what we want to do is we want to handle stopping and starting the map from our SVG instead of doing it for the button. This way it can happen automatically. We can collapse the SVG and then we can add mouse events. I'm going to add an on mouse move. So if the mouse move, I'm going to stop the map. So remember we had that set is rotate state. I'll set it to false. And once the mouse is out, we can let our map continue and rotate. So we'll set it to true. Then let's see, we don't have any error. It takes a few seconds to re-index for the IDE. Okay, then the last thing I'm going to do is we're drawing a circle. So for our coordinate, we kind of pointed out with a circle, but what we can do, which is what you've seen in the map, is we can put a conditional inline programming in the JSX and check if it's the selected item. This way we can pass a selected item, and if it's the selected item, what we can do is we can use that pulse setting circle that we created earlier in a previous section. In section 2, we're creating that pulse setting circle, and what we can do is we can use that code and just check if this is the selected item. So to do that, what we're going to do is we can add into our interface both a selected item that's going to be of type client object, and what we can do is we can also pass the selected item function, so we can also allow the user to set it from our component. And it's going to give us some error message because we need to go to the client widget and edit into our component. Let's go to the top of the function, and we can create another state. Let's call it selected item and set selected item, and that's going to be a state, use state, and I can give it the type is going to be our client's objects, and we can set it as initial value is 0. For the initial value, I can take the client data and use the first item from the client data as 0. This way it's going to select automatically the first value. And now that we have the selected item and the set selected item set up, what we can do, let's collapse everything. And what we can do is we can add it to our map. So let's put the selected item as the selected item state, and the set selected item as the set selected item state. And that way now our map has access to the selected item, and it can also set it for us. We can use also Recoil to do this work, so we can have Recoil do this work and set the state, but here I'm just passing in the function. Now we can go back to our world map and we can put a conditional statement And instead of just doing the circle, we can check if it's the selected item. If it's the selected item, we'll use that pulsating circle, and if it's not a selected item, we'll use the circle. I showed you how to do the conditional rendering, but we can do another thing here, and instead of doing an if-else statement, what we can do is we can just return whatever we want to return. So we can put the statement, for example, in our statement we need to check the selected item, so we're gonna return the prop selected item, right? Oops. Selected item, and then we're gonna check if it's the ID. If the data equal the ID, then we want to return the circle, and if it's not the ID, we want to return the pulsating circle. So if it's the ID, we'll return the circle. Let's close the tag, and if it's not the ID, we're going to return the pulsating circle. So make sure we don't have an error. Okay. An error. Let's put a space here, and it's the bracket. Okay, looking good. Now for the pulsating circle, here's the code. I have it on my desktop. This is from section 2. So I'm going to put it in our component. So let's call it out. Pulsating circle, and it needs the CX, it needs the CY, and because we're in a map, we need to add a key. So for the key, let's call it pulsating circle, and we'll add the key. And for the X and Y, we can just use the same statement to use our return projection value when valid. Great. One more thing we want to do is when the user click the handle marker, so when the user click that, before what we did, we put an alert, but this time we don't need an alert. What we can do is we can use that set selected item prop we passed the function, and we can select our selected item. So we can take our client data, and the index that we're passing, that's the item that got selected. And what we can do is we can set is rotate to false, so we can stop the map. So if the user click one of those markers, we can set the data, and then it's going to be passing it back to the client's widget, and we're going to stop the map. Great, now let's run localhost. Great, so we have our map. Once we hover over any of those markers, our map pause. We have our client list component, and we have a client list detail component already set. So we're really ready to continue, and we finish with the widget.